Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of the I Owe It to Myself podcast as we continue our bookish fun with the novella Six Scorched Roses. Before we dive into my thoughts about the book, I do want to say that this is a real-time introduction that I am recording as I'm getting ready to edit this episode. For those of you who've been listening before, you'll know what I'm referring to. For those of you who may be here for the first time, I'll just quickly say that a lot of times I record episodes where I'm sharing my thoughts about a book or about certain sections of a book, and I don't edit it until weeks later. And so if I do my full introduction where I also give some behind the scenes or an update of where things are at or anything like that, sometimes that content can feel a little bit outdated to me by the time that I go to edit it, and it just doesn't feel like it makes a lot of sense. So I've been playing with the thought of just diving right into the books when I'm recording and then coming in later and doing the introduction when I'm ready to edit it. So that way, at least what you're hearing at the upfront is much more current to when I go to post the episode, because even now from when I edit to when this episode gets posted, it could be several days, it could even still be a week or so. But I do just want these introductions at times to be a little bit more current. So all of that to say, that is what this is right now. And I won't go on for too long, but I did just want to touch on something before we dive into this book. At the time of me doing this introduction, I'm in the middle of reading the second book of this first duology by Carissa Broadbent in this Crowns of Nyaxia series. And so I will be done with that book pretty soon. And then I'm also in the middle of reading the third book in Crescent City. And while I have a good amount of book to still get through, that will also wrap up fairly soon. And I don't have books in mind that I want to read next, which is kind of a first for me. I feel like for a little while I've had a little bit of a stack to get through because I knew, for example, when I started with Fourth Wing, I wanted to do that whole series. I knew when I did Crescent City that it would be all three of those books. So I haven't made those decisions yet. And I think the reason why I feel like speaking about it is because I feel like I'm at a little bit of a turning point, which is that I have read and been recording episodes all in the fantasy, young adult fantasy, romantasy realm, because that is just what I happen to be reading at the time and interested in, and what my, immediate stack in front of me was. And I don't and haven't picked books just for the sake of feeling like, oh, this would be a good read to do a read along for, or for the sake of the podcast. That has never influenced it. It's always just been about what I'm interested in and what I want to read. That being said, I have plenty in my TBR to get through and more than enough choices of where I could go from here. But I think I just want to share some of what my brain is kind of tossing around right now, which is, do I pivot away from this genre that I so clearly love and spend a lot of time in to try and go do something a little bit different? Because I do have other books and other genres that I own, that I've read, that I like, that I enjoy. And so it is something that I am considering doing. I also can consider the fact that I can do a standalone book. I don't have to do series. And so that's something that I'm playing with. I think for me, one of the things I'm considering, and I've talked about this before, but there is a crime mystery series that I started a long time ago, and I am contemplating rereading that first book again to do a read along for. And then there's a second book and a third book. So I own the first two. I could certainly get the ebook of the third until the paperback comes out and record for all three of those. And I think that would be a really fun change. They're not too involved and they go pretty quick. And I think that, again, it would be nice to pivot to something completely different and go into that realm. I have also considered potentially picking up Divergent and reading those books. I watched the movies and I have enjoyed all of them, but I never read the books. So that could be a very interesting experience, especially because I know that Veronica Roth is launching a new book. And while I know that it's because it isn't a continuation of what's already out, there is no pressure to reread what's already there before diving into that book. But I feel like it could be a nice time to do that and to read those books for the first time, but I don't currently own them. So that is something that I would have to consider. I also want to keep in mind that here soon, I am going to have to start my recordings for ACOTAR. So for me, this would be my second time reading the series. I had just started this podcast not long after I had finished that series, and believe me, it was a thing that I really grappled with in terms of wanting to record for them. And figure out how to do that in a way that didn't feel like I was spark noting it, and it felt just as natural as it does when I do my read-alongs now. But I just knew that the only way it was going to feel the way I wanted it to is if I read the books again, and I wasn't going to read them again right away. But that series definitely was part of what was invigorating me at the time that I was really thinking about starting this podcast. So now that we have the announcement of new books coming, and because it's been a while since I've read those books, I think that it would be a good time to do that. And because there are 5 of them, even though one of them is the small novella, I know that I'm going to have at least 3 episodes per book, because as Shayam's writing really just gets me going in a way where I feel like I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of things to share. And so it's going to take many weeks for me to get through all 5 of those books and to record and to post them in succession in a way that feels like a continuous and thorough read along for all of the books together. And I need to start that soon, actually, if I'm going to be in a place to where we're sitting good by the time October comes, because I certainly want to dive into those books and read them as soon as they are available. And I know I'm going to be gushing to share what it is that I want to share. And it's going to kill me a little bit, I think, if I'm in the middle of a reread for some of the other books and starting to read the new one. So I say all of that to say that I definitely have some content planning to do. I need to pull out the calendar. I need to mark some things down and figure out where that's going to slot in. But I want to share all of this because this is where my mind goes, right? This is the behind the scenes of thinking about what direction I want to go in and why. And I think it's just a little bit different this time and a little bit trickier than past times, because I know that I want to do that ACOTAR read along, and I know that there's a little bit of a time frame around it because of when the new books are going to come out. And so I want to be ready for that. And therefore I want to think about, what do I want to pick up now? And can I possibly finish that? Or would it make sense for me to be doing that when I start the ACOTAR read along? Which also means that I may not do 2 separate books at the same time. I may just slow down a little bit and do 1 book at a time, which may, again, could mean a lot of different things in terms of what I choose and how I go forward. So we shall see what happens. I'm definitely going to put some thought to it, and again, some planning, and lay out what it is that I think would make the best choice going forward. But there are moments like this, right, where you're content planning and calendar planning, and it's fun. These are the kinds of things about having a creative outlet and a hobby like this that should be enjoyable. This is the kind of stuff that is interesting in a way because you are in charge. You have the ability to make the decisions and put forward what it is that you want to. And while something about that can be a tiny bit stressful or give me a little bit of anxiety, because I know it's not a quick answer and I do have to put thought to it and come up with a solid plan, there is the other side of that where I do think it's fun and it's nice to be in charge of my own domain, so to speak. So I look forward to seeing what's to come next, and I hope that you all stick around and that it's books that you end up interested in so that you will continue to read along with me as I go. All of that to say, we're going to go ahead now and pivot to the recording for Six Scorched Roses. Again, this is the novella that is in between the first book and the second book of the duology that is first in the Crowns of Nyaxia series. And this is a 1-episode series. So we're going to talk about the entire book in this 1 episode. Here we go. All right. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the Six Scorched Roses novella, which is the book that Carissa Broadbent recommends that you read after the first book in the Nightborn duet, in between the first and the second, which is the first duology in the Crowns of Nyaxia series. I don't have a ton to say about this. It is a very short novella, which I appreciate. I actually read it over 2 sittings though, and I think, again, for me, it was a little hard to get into the story initially, especially because coming off of the first book, we were right in the thick of just finding out so much information and the drama and the writing really picking up that I was very excited about. So to kind of put a pause in that, to then have this story, that's always really tough to do. And I think that's why novellas can be really difficult. However, I do appreciate that it ends up leading into where the second book will pick up for the duology. And so you just have to realize that you're having this story that is occurring kind of in parallel to what happened in book 1. What I will say is it took me a while to figure that out. Like, that was, I think, part of what made it hard to get into this story, is because I didn't know where I was. Was I in the same time frame? Was I after the first book? Was this way before anything had even happened in the first book? Like, I didn't get a sense of that very quickly. And so it was hard to orient myself, not only, again, just because I was coming off of being at a really heightened part of where book one had ended, but just timeline wise, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to get out of it, or if this was like a historical story or, again, something happening in parallel. So the way that I read this and what I understand it to be is that this was happening in parallel or just slightly after the first book had happened. It wasn't, a full historical backstory of any of the characters that we're going to come to know better in book two. That being said, I think in general, I feel like I didn't connect as much with Vale or Lilith as I did with Oriah and Rain, because while Lilith seemed to be like a younger character, Vale just came across so much older. And I think that was one part of his character that was tough for me. Obviously, vampires are old because most of the time, by the time we're seeing them, they've already been around for hundreds of years. But the bodies that they inhabit oftentimes are bodies of those like in their 20s or 30s. So they look physically young, but everything about him, he carried himself as a much older vampire. So when we first meet him, I have no idea what I'm really looking at. Like, the way that he's described and Lilith's initial impression of him, the one thing that kind of tipped me off was she commented on like his size and like how muscular he seemed. And it kind of threw me, because what I was expecting that she was walking into was like this really old vampire, that it was a person who actually physically looked old, and like he just was kind of this creepy guy, and I wasn't sure what role that he was going to play. But the more that he was talked about, the more I came to realize that he was in a young person's body. It just wasn't innately, like, it wasn't clear to me quickly that was the case. And I think for me, as the kind of reader that I am, I want to understand that more quickly. I have the imagination to be able to put myself in these situations in the story and really like see it in my mind as I'm reading it. And so if I don't have those details, I'm filling in the gaps with whatever it is that, I think makes sense in the moment. And so when what I'm thinking of doesn't end up vibing with the reality of the situation, obviously I course correct to make sure that I'm thinking of it in the way that it's meant to be consumed. But it's just so much harder when the details are stretched out. If she would have said, like on her first impression of seeing Vale, like, yes, he is this mysterious, kind of secluded, older vibed individual that is in the body of what looks to be a 20-year-old, but his wisdom, like, you know what I'm saying? If I had just gotten that in a matter of a couple of sentences, it would have allowed me to place him and to be like, okay, he's been a vampire for quite a long time because of the way he carries himself. Also, because of the way he carries himself, he's probably born not bitten, which we do find out is true. But it's like, there's just certain things that I feel like I just had a harder time picturing the characters and the environment that we were in because of the lack of description, or the fact, not even the lack, but that it was just spread out so long, and I wasn't getting it as soon as I felt like I would have preferred. All that to say, what was also kind of difficult about this is there's something about the writing that at times makes me feel like we are like back in the day, but yet there are times where when I was reading the first book with like Oriah and Rain, where it just felt more like modern day youth. And so again, it's hard to place like, what century are we in? Is this like we're back in the 1700s, 1800s, or even way before that? Are we in the 2000s? Are we in the future? Like, I don't feel like I've been oriented well to understand the time frame of this, and maybe that's intentional. Maybe we're not supposed to understand exactly what year they're in, because the bounds of this world, like the rules of the world and the way that this world is set up, year doesn't really matter. Even if they were to say, oh, we're in the year 2000, it would be irrelevant because the 2000s that I know and what I experienced it to be has no bearing on this world. So like, I can't understand it, but I guess what I'm saying is I feel like there's some context clues that have made it hard for me to know exactly where I'm supposed to be at. And this book very much felt that way. So I wasn't exactly sure where we were going with this story. That being said, on one hand, I was glad that it was short because I don't feel like there was a ton that was there to be said about these characters. What we're really getting here is how they meet and where their story leaves off. So that way, when I believe that they inevitably come into play into book 2, we understand how they got there and why. As far as what role either of them are going to play, that remains to be seen. And this is where the crossover does make me intrigued. What we come to find out in this book is as Lilith is getting to know Vale and they're having conversations and she's asking more questions about his world and he's realizing that she knows a lot for a human and that she's interested, they have these conversations. He's saying, they want me to go back to Obitrai, I don't know how to say it. He doesn't want to go back there. And this is where you kind of realize that it's in the same time frame as book 1, because he says a bastard king has been put into place and I don't want to have anything to do with it. But other generals of this army are no longer alive and I was one of the best generals that they had and they want me to come back to help, but I don't want to serve under him. And a lot of people don't want to serve under him. So you realize that even though Vale is being called upon to come and help now that the Rishans have taken back over, he doesn't have any loyalty to who this new king is. And you are assuming that he's now talking about Rain. That's what I'm assuming. So that's where I was piecing together, okay, a new bastard king, that would be Rain, because he wasn't really the true child of the last king that was there, but he got the heir mark. He's taken over because the Rishans overran the Hiages. And so now they're trying to get their footing and rule this kingdom. And he's saying what we already knew, which is that a lot of the Rishans are not really wanting to serve under this person who's now ruling. But a point that Lilith makes is kind of were your people better off before when the Rishans weren't in power? And he's like, no, they weren't. And she's like, so would you rather them be in the situation that they were in before or go and do something hard that you don't necessarily want to do, which is serve under this guy that you don't necessarily have any loyalty to, but for the sake of doing what's better for your people? And she's putting that in the context of her situation, right? I don't want to work away my life and I don't want to not have time with the people around me that I love. But if it gets me to a place where I can help my people survive, then I will do it. What we are seeing in this moment is a couple of things. By the end of this book, Lilith and Vale are fully in love, fully together. She's now a vampire and they're going to go back to Obitrai together. So we're going to see what's to come of that, right? Obviously, there's going to be a lot that she has to learn, but what she has demonstrated in some of this thinking and this point that I just made during that conversation is that she is willing and able to look outside of herself for the greater good. She already is intelligent in that regard. Obviously, she has a big education. That's a huge part of this book, her scientific education. So you know that she's smart, you know that she's talented, you know that she's educated. But she also has this ability, while she has many faults, she has this ability to be able to look at a situation kind of pragmatically and to look at a situation and kind of deduce what side of it do you want to be on if these are your options. While he was looking at the situation of going back as this isn't my issue. I don't want to be a part of this war. I'm here living my life. What happens is what happens. And I don't have to be a part of it, until she's like, yeah, but what do you really want for those people? And essentially for yourself, you can be ignorant because you're not there living in it, but it actually still does greatly affect you to some degree. They know where you are. They're asking for your help. They probably will never stop. What side of all of this do you want to be on? In some regards, he kind of, walked away from that whole situation in that war like Rain did. And I'm very curious to see if Vale is a prominent character in book 2 and if him and Rain have some kind of understanding with each other because of that. Granted, their stories are very different, and how Vale feels about Rain is probably not going to be great for a lot of reasons that I hope we come to find out. But there is a side of that where they both have walked away from what their lives were for whatever their personal reasons were. And came back into it for different reasons, but ultimately for the same, which is like the betterment of the Rishan people. And so I'm interested to see if they end up being able to be allies enough because of some of those similarities. However, how I look at Vale and how I look at Rain is very, very different. Rain feels very much like a younger personality, whereas Vale feels much, much older and like more sophisticated, which is interesting because they both have like commanded other people and kind of served in an army of sorts. So really, I am curious if they served alongside each other, but at a glance, it seems that they really are cut from the same cloth. So I don't know how that interaction is going to go, but seeing what I've seen of Vale through this story, albeit it is a romantically focused story, I've learned enough to be interested in what role he's going to play in this next book. Lilith, I could give or take. I don't know that I need her to play a really big part in book 2, but would I be okay with seeing her be an ally to Oriah and then both kind of having new roles, right? Lilith is a new role as a vampire who once was human. Oriah, who was always thought to be human, but she has been half human, half vampire the entire time. So she's not fully vampire, but she has now these powers because of this air mark and all this stuff. There's similarities there too. Again, how they got there is very different, but it's like I can see the 4 of them becoming much more of an allyship and like a group over time. But also, would I be okay with Lilith not playing a big role? I think, but I could go both ways, I guess. Obviously, diving back into book 2, I'm really interested in Oriah and Rain. They're the ones in the thick of it and playing the biggest part in these books because they're the central characters of the stories. So I don't want to get too distracted by stuff on the side, but I am curious if going into this next book, if the relationship between Oriah and Rain, that will obviously be a part of the story, but if the relationship between Lilith and Vale will be seen as much or if it will fall to the wayside. Because really what we saw in book 1 was, of course, the relationship between Vincent and Oriah, which was familial, and the relationship between Mish and Rain, which was familial, and then the romantic relationship between Oriah and Rain. But for the most part, I don't know that I really was looking at them in parallel to each other. There was always something about Oriah and Vincent that just kind of seemed to the side, and the main focus of what you were uncovering was this romantic relationship brewing with Rain. And maybe it's because although there was stuff you come to find out about Vincent that you didn't know before, you already knew what he was to her and you knew the love that they had for each other on this familial side, whereas with Rain you had no clue what part he was going to play in her life, so you're more invested in what is developing. I don't know, but going into book 2, if you have these 2 romantic relationships side by side, they're both newly developing. So I could see them both being something that would be interesting to follow along with. We will just have to see. Who knows how much time the author is going to want to put into Lilith and Vale and how much, story time we're going to get of them compared to the main story at hand. I will admit that I'm a little confused at the core story in terms of the curse that Lilith was facing. It was explained, but it was kind of hard to follow. And again, it might have been because I was intrigued, but not fully invested. What you're led to believe is that her father was so upset about his crops not growing that he cursed the god that they were all supposed to believe in this part of the land. And the god came down and smited the entire town. And so this plague came and everybody started dying. A big part of what Lilith's story is she's always known death. When she was born, she barely survived. She was pretty sick, but she kind of made it out through that, but has always lived a pretty frail life. And then when her sister was born, her mother didn't survive that birth. So she's experienced loss and understands what it is to see death and to be weak and what have you. And then when the situation happened with her father, everyone around her had started to die because of this plague, and her father was one of the first to die. And she has been actively watching her sister die for a while now. So she just put all of her effort into education and school and whatever to try to find a way to survive, to cure this situation. I did wonder often how it was possible that she wasn't sick in the way that her sister was. There was only one point in the book where she ends up getting really, really sick. And that's when she stays with Vale and their bond grows to be really strong. And I think is when they really, truly start to fall in love with each other. But other than that moment of time, and even in that moment of time, she starts to mention how she starts to feel better and feel stronger after the situation that she was in. Her sister doesn't experience that. Anytime that her sister's referenced, it's always just how much her skin is flaking off and this dust, people basically are turning to dust, and her sister is experiencing that, and how much they always have to sweep up after all these people. And essentially when these bodies fully die, they just turn to dust, and or there's barely anything to burn away when people finally die. And it's just they're withering away. Lilith, even when she was really sick with Vale, there was never any comment about her skin flaking off or her being sick from the plague. And so it was a question in my mind, but I also just kind of kept going. I didn't think too much of it, but I had questioned often, why is she not experiencing exactly what her father did or what her sisters did or what her sister is feeling or what any of these other people are feeling. So I knew that there was something that was going on there, but I wasn't quite sure what it was, right? When the god ends up coming back and she's trying to save everybody and she says, I'll make a deal with you. And he says, well, your father did too. I'm not exactly clear of what it was. The god makes this remark of how he let the flowers bloom, but they were inedible. But there's also the comment of the fact that Lilith lived. And so she has this moment of realization where she's like, death has been coming for me since I was born. I was born with a sickness. I've always been kind of weak and frail, and I've always just kind of had the sickness with me. So she's always felt like death has just been a knock away, but it's never come for her. And it's she has the light bulb moment where she's like, how is it that I haven't died like my dad? How is it that I haven't gotten sick like my sister? I've just continued to push through. And it's because whatever bargain her dad made with this god, it was to spare Lilith. So for whatever reason, whenever this whole smiting happened and the plague came, I don't know what her dad bargained for. I don't know if he said please let my daughter live and please let my crops grow and you can take anything else. And so he took everyone, he just plagued the town and said, I'll take anything else then that you don't care about. And the crops that he gave him was these flowers that would never die, but that aren't edible. You can't feed anybody off of it. So they don't really serve a purpose. Nobody would really be able to do anything with them. Nobody would want to really buy them because you can't get nourishment or life from them. They just live. That's what I think happened, but it isn't completely clear. You just know that he got these flowers that never die and that Lilith lived, but you don't really understand what he gave up. But whatever it was, whether it was himself or he just said forsake everything else except my crops and my daughter, the god then just plagued everybody. I'm not exactly clear. So that was a little bit confusing to me. But in this conversation with the god, when she's figuring all of this out, you know those two things to be true. The flowers came and would forever live, and Lilith was spared, but nobody else really was. So she has realized that this feeling of death always kind of being near was because death did expect to take her. It just got outwitted because of this deal with the god. And now that the god was there and she was in trouble for her whole situation with Vale and killing the guys that were after Vale and essentially killing an acolyte that was the main supporter of this god, she now has to make a deal. She basically says, I need you to unplague this entire town and save my sister and you can have me because I know that you've essentially been waiting. And the god makes the deal, but here's the thing. I could see as that was happening that she was going to end up getting turned into a vampire because there was no way that Vale was going to let her die. What I don't understand is why the god wasn't smart enough to know that. Gods are not stupid. Yes, can they be outwitted? Sure. In many shows and books and things, we see them getting outsmarted. But there is a moment where a lot of the times they're 2-3 steps ahead, and that's what creates a challenge for a lot of the main characters, right? So it was crazy to me that he knew that a vampire was involved, that he knew that the deal was contingent upon her dying, but yet he allowed it to happen. and that he didn't, because there could have very well been something where like Vale bit her and she couldn't survive it and the god just let her die. If I had to guess, the reason why he was quote unquote outsmarted by this is because technically vampires are not living things. Like, they are dead, yet they are immortal, but they're not living beings, because a living something ages and dies eventually. So in his mind, this god was probably like, yes, I will have you die, but if you don't die as a human because of the sickness that was supposed to take you in the first place, you'll die because you'll end up becoming a vampire. And then in your eternal form, you'll have to praise me forever because I'm the god of this area. Maybe that's what he thought. I don't know. The reason why I struggle with even that is because she was never going to praise him as a god. She was never going to lean into him, because vampires give their loyalty to Nyaxia for the most part. Vale is a vampire under Nyaxia. He's a vampire from the Court of Night. And so Lilith has already hated this god because of everything that he has put everybody through. She would never pledge loyalty to him. So really, I think this could be one of these moments where there's a plot hole, where it's like, he should have known better. He's not that stupid, but they just outsmarted him by turning her into a vampire. And even if my theory was right about him being like, well, you'll be a vampire, so you'll live forever and you'll like lean to me, you'll be loyal to me, she never would have been, because she already had hated him. So it would have been a flawed thought process anyway. Now she can just accept the fact that death has finally taken her, which was always her fate. It just wasn't her fate to actually die. It was her fate to be immortal. And now she can live with the man that she loves. There's cons to that, sure. But I mean, ultimately, in the way that everything could have ended, that's the best possible outcome. Her sister is alive. Her sister can live her full life. This town is better. And she's with the man that she loves. Like, yes, they're going to go into war together. But like, you couldn't really paint a better ending. So it just feels like this is one of those moments where there's a plot hole, unless something comes of it in the second book. But there was just some loose ends there that I was a little bit bothered by. And I'm just used to reading stories that don't leave stuff like that open-ended. So I think this is one of those moments where I just have to accept this approach and this kind of writing and this author's approach, and that it varies from other stuff that I've read. But it's interesting to talk about it and touch on it and acknowledge that some of those plot holes do exist. All that to say, I will say that I think in like the entirety of me having read this little book, I'm glad that I read it. I'm glad that it was quick, and I'm excited to see what comes. And I actually now, I think at the end of all of this, reflecting, I do hope that Vale and Lilith make a decent appearance in this book and that we can see what comes of it. But if not, I feel satisfied with the fact that in this short little novella, I was able to understand how they came to be together, enough of their histories to understand them as characters, and to feel like I know that they're going to live life together, however short or long that is, up for interpretation. You know, if we don't actually get them in this second book to answer those questions, and I'm okay with that. So I feel pretty good about it. Again, I'm glad that I read it. It was a quick read, and I'm ready to just get into the thick of the second book. So this is a moment where it makes sense to just do one recording and one episode for this one book. Like I said, that it was not something that I was wanting to really do. I like to record as I read, and oftentimes that comes across in like 3 or 4 recordings per book, but this one is so short, it just didn't make sense to record anything more than one episode. So we can just check off another book off of the list, which feels good. And I really am interested to see what you guys think. How do you feel about it? How do you feel about these characters? I really do want to revisit those questions when we get into book 2. You know, I'm interested to see why I feel like it was worth reading once I get into book 2. You know, how does any of those thoughts or feelings change? So that will remain to be seen, but interested to hear if people like these characters and like this little novella, and any of your thoughts and feelings on it. So please share that in the comments of YouTube. Follow along with socials as per usual to stay up to date of what we're reading next and when episodes are going to drop. And I just appreciate everybody being here and following along. So thank you so much, and until next time, friends.